Welcome back to another episode of Hazy Headed. Today we're going to talk about how important it is to give yourself grace. I'm Evan Brandt, and this is Forgiving Yourself. So anytime we make a mistake, which is inevitable, we oftentimes have this bad habit of sort of making it seem like we shouldn't do that, which is hilarious because that's the only way you can learn. Everybody knows that. But then, you look at your friend, right? He might disrespect you. He might have said something that was wrong. He might have done, maybe said something just insensitive about your situation, and you're quick to forgive them. We give our friends and our family so much grace on a regular basis, and we don't have that same energy for ourselves. I look back when I was drinking to the point of ridiculousness, all sorts of problems that stemmed from that. And one of the biggest things once I got sober that I had to come to terms with is being okay with my past self and saying, look, you messed up and that's okay. And that's difficult because we oftentimes hold ourselves to such a high standard, especially people that are perfectionists. And I'm not even a perfectionist. I give myself grace way more than the average person. I still feel the weight of how important it is. I look at things in my life where I was not always 100% present, or I didn't do things the correct way. And people on their deathbeds, the number one regret is not going for what they want, or maybe they didn't go for the life they wanted. But one thing, they want to forgive people too. And that's the thing. Once you are on your deathbed, you realize that all those feelings that you had towards others were kind of silly. And but as a culture, we are apologetic. We always have to be walking on eggshells, and you always have to dim what you believe in order to not offend anybody. And it's so funny because we're so worried about how we treat others, but then we never pay attention to how we treat ourselves. And I think it's backwards, because if you can forgive yourself and you can treat yourself good, you can put good food in your body, you can stay energetic towards goals, and you can understand yourself more. I think the treating others is secondary. I think that just comes with the nature of it. And a lot of times we are so afraid to do that for some reason. Like when I say we're afraid to do that, what I really mean is maybe we don't want to be expressive, or maybe we don't want to, like I said, offend anybody. But self-confidence is important, and you won't have that if you have something looming over you. And I think something that's important for you to understand is that you just need to take a little time and really analyze yourself and say, okay, this is a part of me that I don't like. How can I do something just a little bit to change it? And the idea is that you have to accept every part of yourself, the good, the bad, the ugly, the ugliest. And, in order to do that, you have to have a moment where you just sit down and maybe you think. And meditation is an overused word. You don't have to meditate, but you do need to bring yourself to that silence and realize that you're human. And that doesn't mean you should always excuse your behavior. There's a difference between forgiving yourself and excusing your behavior. Excusing your behavior is just saying, oh, that's okay. Yeah, nothing. Forgiving yourself is understanding that that's not who you were, or that's not who you are now. And that may be a fundamental piece in your story, but you don't have to submit to that. You don't have to say, wow, I was a piece of shit for so long. That's just who I am. No, don't live that way. Live in a way where you are constantly forgiving others, but holding others accountable, holding yourself accountable, chasing towards your goals, not distracting yourself with pleasure, all these things that are talked about all the time. But it's very funny that we think there's a hustle culture in today's society that makes you really think you have to put yourself through suffering in order to thrive. And that's just silly. You really don't. There's a time for suffering. Like if you feel like you don't want to do something, but you have to do it anyways, that's part of discipline. But saying things like, man, I'm a little bitch, or I can't get anything figured out, that's not a good look. And your mind isn't going to like that. And it's not going to entertain that idea. I think the biggest thing to take away from interacting with others and, spending time alone is that you are a collaborative you are a collaborative person. So being able to do that, that's essential in a team. When you go to work, you're going to have to be with other people. You're going to have to problem solve. You're going to have to figure things out. And you can't do that if you have pent up emotions. And, that's a lot of thing. When I realized my old job, everybody would just stay silent and not speak their mind or be expressive about things that could be improved. And that's a real hindrance on an ability for the team. Now, just imagine that same attitude towards yourself. You're looking at yourself and you're saying, wow, okay, well, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. And then you're really burdening your mind if you think about it, because then, you lose faith in what you're doing. And, you lose sight of what's important to you. And that's why, negative self-talk, I talk about this all the time. Saying things like, I'm so stupid, or I just can't figure things out. You have to avoid that sort of language at all costs, because your brain is like a sponge, and you'll really start to compound your negative aspects. And, that's the biggest thing too. Like, some people believe that forgiveness you shouldn't forgive yourself in every scenario. Like, maybe you did something terrible, like maybe you were a drunk driver like me, thank God I didn't hit anybody, but imagine somebody that did, or killed somebody behind the wheel while they were just blacked out drunk. Those people are going to take a long time to heal, but I still believe there's grace for them. And all I'm saying is, if you've done the most terrible things on earth and you feel like there's nothing that you deserve more, but maybe even death, maybe you have such a blackened heart that you feel that way, and I'm here to say you can be somebody totally different starting today than you were 24 hours ago. And that's the beauty of life. And that's why there's so much symbolism. That's why you see all those little white girls with butterfly tattoos, because that's true. You can be reborn. You can become somebody that you only imagine about in your dreams. Like, you can live your wildest dreams. And it starts with understanding and accepting that you're human and you're not less than anybody if you've made a lot of mistakes in your past. You're less than others if you don't make any sort of changes. But that's a decision. You can say to yourself, okay, well, let's analyze this. So don't dwell on it, but just think of, okay, well, what were my motives here? What was going on? And I think you'll come to find with just a little bit of introspection that you aren't operating on a level that's malicious or evil, because self-aware people are not going to be your evil, narcissistic, sociopathic people. They're going to be everyday people that just want to be better and understand themselves more. And a lot of things, we don't forgive ourselves for a lot of silly things. Something that you did 3 years ago that you said to your buddy that was harsh. And for some reason, we internalize that so often. And I think that it's unhealthy, obviously, but I think one actionable practice that you can do is that meditation, getting yourself to that silent state where thoughts flow at a slower pace, and that you're not overwhelmed with past failures. Negative thought loops get reinforced by negativity. So that's why, like I said, if you make a little mistake and you say, I'm so stupid, I can't do this, well, then you're going to start doing more stupid things, because that's the narrative you created for yourself. So everything can be fixed. I don't submit to the idea that you can't become somebody that can be renewed. This is very dark. But if let's say you were abused as a child, and maybe as you got older, God forbid, you abused somebody. That's not excusable by any means, and you have to get that figured out, whether that's verbal, physical, or anything else. But I still think there's hope for you. I don't think you have to write yourself off. I think you can heal, and now it might be tough, and you might have to put some fire in your ass, and you're going to have to want to change. But that's just an example of that you are never too far gone. You are never too lost. You are never beyond repair. And that's important to know. And what you should do is really focus on the future and accept your mistakes, yes, but you don't have to be easy on yourself. It's not about being easy on yourself. Do the work to heal, and maybe you have to put yourself in an embarrassing situation where you admit your wrongdoing. But once you really free yourself of that, there's nothing you can't accomplish, because you've put yourself in a vulnerable state, and you've said, and like I said, we are the hardest people to forgive is ourselves, but being able to do that should give you so much power, and it's so much internal strength and guidance. And ultimately, what we decide to do starting today will determine our future. Nothing with our past has to contribute to that. So focus on fully healing, giving yourself a little grace, and becoming the best version of yourself. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of Hazy Headed. I'm so glad you guys tune in every Sunday for my podcasts, and you have a great rest of your day.